Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me, but we're having some technical difficulties. The meeting should start shortly. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. We should be just a few more moments, and we will be able to have the chair and the committee start.
Thank you all.
Hello, Commissioner. Commissioner Ames Messenger, you can hear me, right?
I can hear you.
Joan, can you speak? I'm just trying to figure out who could speak because I couldn't originally. I couldn't originally, but now I can. Who else
Yeah,
can speak?
I'm sorry. This is Dewan in the board office. We are trying to get the chair. There was some IT issue with getting her logged in. So we're just waiting to be able to get the chair in.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Can hear
Yep.
you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
It seems like you might want to also for Lallinger and Kenyatta Bay. They're both in the line, but it might be worth making sure checking sound for them too.
Commissioner Lallinger?
I can hear. Yes, I'm here and I can hear.
Yep.
Everybody, I'm sorry, it's
I'm also
Dewan again.
here.
Everybody can speak. We're just, the chair is having an issue logging in. So that's what the holdup is right now. But everyone that has permission to speak can speak right now.
Okay.
But thanks for checking,
Okay.
Ames Messenger. I was not in the meeting originally, but I'm now here.
Can you hear us and speak, Kwame? I know that this is a period of transition for him in the day, so I want to make sure we're not making his life more difficult later.
I don't actually see him.
I saw him earlier.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome aboard.
Amen, Kwame. Hello. How are you, Mr. Kenyatta Bay?
Hi, everybody. I want to apologize. We have a little bit of technical difficulties as we're getting used to this new Teams version. So we do appreciate everybody's patience this afternoon. Commissioner Esposito will join us shortly. So why don't we go ahead and get started? And I want to welcome everybody to today's September 30th, 2025 meeting of the Policy Committee. Just want to remind everybody that we'll have an opportunity for public comment this afternoon. And for those who are participating, we ask that you do come off mute and off camera for today's conversation, today's presentation. I'm going to do a brief roll call because I have very brief materials in front of me because I just hopped on. So a roll call, I believe, is Commissioner Ames Messenger.
Present.
Thank you, Commissioner Redding Lollinger. Thank you. We got you. And I am present and stepping in this afternoon as the guest star. And excited to join us and get started this afternoon. Because I don't have the first agenda item in front of me, Commissioner Ames Messenger, do you know which one it is?
I believe that we are starting with the framing for the arts for IKEA. Is that correct, Dr. Dabrowski? Or is
Yes,
it-
this is Dewana. We're starting with policy IKEA, promotion and retention grades K through 12, and
Okay.
IKEB, yes.
Okay, let's start with that because I know Commissioner Ames Messenger, I'm sorry, Commissioner Esposito is really interested in the arts framing conversation. So as soon as she can, that'll be great to join. And I believe Commissioner Chicas Guzman is here as well.
Yes, I am. Yes.
Welcome. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to overlook you. All right, I'm going to turn over to Dr. Dabrowski to take us through.
And
Thank
just
you
a-
so. oh,
Dr. Dabrowski, just a quick, if we could also share this PowerPoint because it wasn't in our board docs. We just have the supporting documents from MSDE, I believe, not this PowerPoint, unless other commissioners have it and I just couldn't find it in the right spot.
No, you're right. We had the math policy, the ELA policy, and the college and career readiness, but we didn't have a presentation.
Okay, we will certainly make sure that you have this. So good afternoon, everybody. I am Joan Dabrowski. I'm Chief Academic Officer. This afternoon is the framing discussion for IKEA, which is our promotion and retention policy, and IKEB, which is our graduation policy. So this afternoon, my hope is to be able to give you an overview of each of those policies and talk about the need for the review and revision, and then share our proposed next steps and timeline. If we go to the next slide, these two policies are very much showing up in priority 1 and priority 4. As you can see, the space around instruction and making sure our students are progressing through their trajectory in schools, making sure that we are having our families and caregivers involved in that journey. Again, you'll see these things creeping up as I talk through these two policies. So let's go ahead and get started and take a look at board policy IKEA, which is again our promotion and retention. You can see here the legal authority that is part that we consider, and that it is connected to IKA, which is our grading policy, and IKEB, which is again our graduation, which we'll talk about momentarily. We did some work in IKEA back in 2021 and such, but we did know that we needed to do some more work as we brought it in to this year. You can go on to the next slide here. So when we think about IKEA and promotion and retention, the crux of this policy has to do with making sure our students have the necessary skills and knowledge to move up to that next grade level. So again, we think about our standards, instruction, and all the supports and intervention to ensure they are ready for the next grade. We also have in this policy what are our procedures for how and when we would assign students to grades, if there's a retention or a promotion, knowing that these are really important decisions for our young people and their families. And then finally, another part of our approach with promotion and retention has been a real focus on reducing the number of instances that students are retained, especially in those early grades, and making sure that we have strong instruction and strong supports in place for students to be successful in their K-12 journey. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to now talk a little bit about board policy IKEB, which is graduation. Again, you can see legal authority, and this has a number of related policies that have to do, again, with promotion, retention, and grading, but also with when there are questions and concerns that there can be an opportunity for a parent or family to ask for a waiver or to be considered exceptions around things. So we have those associated policies that help us make sure that we are following all the rules around appeals and hearings and things of that nature. Again, we've done some work on these policies and regs, but there's some important things that are happening right now in the space that require us to bring it forward for some deeper revision work. But let's talk a little bit more about what's in IKEB. So again, really making sure that we've got students and placed in the right spot to make sure, again, that they're on track for graduation and that college and career preparation. We've got really clear requirements that has to do with credits and making sure there's certain assessments that they have taken, and also a service learning component. And I think this final one has to do, again, back with appeals and hearings, that the level of communication regarding a student's graduation, the progress they're making towards graduation is a real critical space for us, and making sure that everybody's informed of a student's readiness and that they're on track to graduate. So if we go to the next slide, just want to share out a little bit of work that we've done in these spaces over the last couple of years. We made some adjustments, again, knowing that we would be coming forward with a more rigorous level of review. We did look closely at our promotion from grade 9 to grade 10 to ensure that we were aligned with the state expectations. So we did that work. We also did some work around the math requirement, again, keeping it in line with what the state's policy was at that time. And I say that because there's been some new work in the math policy world, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. And we also did a close look at our science requirements. We gave a broader framework having to do more with science categories such as earth science, life science, as opposed to very specific discrete courses, in order, again, to make sure that our students were being set up in the right way for their graduation requirements. So again, we made some adjustments in 24-25. But again, there is some work that we now are thinking about in terms of why we need to do broader revisions. If we go to the next slide. So we know that as part of our work in policy review, we always want to ensure we're using the most up-to-date terminology. So that's a piece that we're looking at. Again, I've signaled a couple of times that there are new state laws and new policy in ELA and math. And then we have new shifts in what our college and career readiness expectations are. So broadly, and I'm going to talk about these a little bit more in detail in the next few slides. So in terms of the terminology and practice, as we've gone through these policies and done our first look, there are just things such as we currently are saying English learner. We have moved to multilingual learner, so needing to clean up that kind of language. There are some new terms that the state uses that we want to make sure are part of our policy. We actually are still referencing our old assessment system. So again, getting it up to speed with using MCAP as opposed to the high school assessment and PARCC assessment language. So again, just cleaning up some of that, more editing work needs to occur. If we go to the next slide, the shifts in English language arts, these are pretty significant. So MSDE has recently adopted a new policy specifically in pre-K through grade 3. And these policies, this policy really does necessitate some shifts in how we are approaching both some intervention work and some of our promotion retention work. And it's the piece that is that for us is important is we've been on a strong path in our literacy work that actually prepares us well for these shifts. There are parts of it that will actually go into play next year that we know, again, we are ready for because we've been doing some of these things. But I think the space for us right now is making sure that our policies are fully aligned with this runway that I'll walk you through in just a moment here. So if we go to the next slide, let's talk a little bit more about what this policy is expecting from LEAs. So again, the state really putting a stake in the ground about the importance of reading proficiency by the end of grade 3. and making sure that we are doing everything we can to get all of our third graders to that grade level proficiency as measured by the state assessment. And so there's some new definitions about what that means for the kinds of materials we use, the kinds of assessments we use. There's some important information about what kinds of supports need to be in place. They're really, really pushing hard, which is great news for us, the science of reading work and the development work for teachers, which City Schools has been committed to for the last 5-7 years. So again, we're sort of ahead of the curve on these pieces. There's clear guidelines around the kind of instruction, the assessments. Again, all of these things we are aligned with. And then there's some really exciting new language around how we engage our families. And then there's some places where we have to update how we will be updating this information for the state through annual compliance. So again, that's important work for us as we dig into the policy. If we go to the next slide, you'll see, though, this has implications for students and families. And as I mentioned, this proficiency in literacy by end of grade 3 in order to be promoted to grade 4. Again, students who do not pass and meet that level of proficiency on the state assessment will need to be retained. And that is, again, a new space for us to be in, and thinking through that of what that means for how we are supporting our students there. This portion of the literacy policy of the promotion side of it begins in school year 27-28. So we do have time to be thinking through. That's our current first graders as we're thinking through that. But it means that we want to make sure we are very vigilant in our assessments and our screeners that we use. All of these, again, are already aligned with what the policy is going to ask. And that we're making sure that there are opportunities for tier 2 interventions when we see at the end of first and at the end of second grade students who may not be on grade level. So again, we have time in these next few years to be getting ourselves ready for that 27-28 when the retention portion of this policy goes into effect. I think it's also important to note that the state in this policy is providing a space for exceptions. So there may be students with a particular learning disability who are perhaps a multilingual learner who have been previously retained. All of these things will be part of a exception space. And there's also an exception space with families, working closely with our families in terms of a waiver. So again, there's a lot of detail here for us to dig into and the implications that will have for students and families. The other thing I want to lift up is the state is asking us starting next year, so school year 26-27, to have an individual reading improvement plan for any student who's not reading on grade level. And the exciting thing for us in City Schools is we've been using student learning plans for the last 5 years. Those plans can serve as our reading improvement plan. So there's some nice alignment because of the work we've already been doing in this space to really capture where a student may need support and unique opportunities, and whether it's tutoring or additional small group that we've got already built into some of the work that's already in place. So then we're going to move now into some of the work that's happening in math. So again, state's been doing a lot of policy work in the area of math and in the area of literacy and also in math. And again, most of this math work we are well lined up for, but you'll see we've got a runway till school year 27-28 when this goes into full implementation. But let's jump into some of the changes that are coming in math that would be likely influencing in this policy revision work we're doing. So again, the state's done some really thoughtful work about making sure that our students have access to robust math instruction and how we think about their progression as they move up through the grades, and particularly beyond algebra. So there are some new definitions that we'll be adding into our policy. There's been a shift in how the secondary math courses will be sequenced. There are promotion requirements that we'll talk about. There's guidelines for how we have to think about accelerated opportunities starting as in the elementary grades, and really making sure that our young people who are showing accelerated learning and understanding are given challenging opportunities to move forward and pushing that space towards getting to algebra sooner in 8th grade. As similar to the literacy policy, there's a lot of work in the teacher development space. City Schools has been part of that math development work already, and we're engaging in it again this year. Certainly, similar to the literacy policy, again, this place around parent engagement, how we're working with our families, and then some compliance shifts. So again, some work that we'll certainly need to bring into our policy as we make these revisions. So for our families and our students, when we think about what is the impact, and again, why this is important to frame as we're moving into this policy work, as I mentioned, this accelerated math pathway starting in the elementary grades to get to that readiness for Algebra 1 is a big part of this policy. So we'll want to be thinking about that. And again, thinking about ways that our students can have access to during the school day support. Again, really important for us to be thinking through these things as we're anticipating it. And then the last piece here is our secondary mathematics pathway. So you can see the state has outlined different pathways that students will follow. And again, the big shift here for us, if we go down to the new course sequence, is 4 credits, 4 years of mathematics in high school. And 2 of those 4 credits are integrated algebra 1 and integrated algebra 2. So some of us may recall a sequence in mathematics that would go algebra 1, geometry, algebra 2. With this new math policy, the state is now requiring that geometry is integrated into algebra 1 and integrated into algebra 2. So again, this will be a new course sequence. The good news for city schools is that in our recent adoption of Reveal Mathematics offers an integrated Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. So again, these are things that will help us get ready for that school year 27-28 launch when these new integrated courses will be required. And again, once students have those 2 credits, those 2 credits, the required ones, Algebra 1, 2, that's when then they move into those secondary math pathways, again, depending on their particular interest and where they're moving in their college career planning. So again, lots going on in the math space there. And then finally, our MSDE shifts in the college career ready standards. We've been talking a lot about the blueprint for Maryland's future and what that means for how we approach both the graduation requirements, what we think about those college career standards to get us ready, but also the work of our career technology education and what we think about of our completer requirements. So we've been talking a bit about industry recognized credentials and making sure that we get our students to that completer step of our CTE journey. So this work here, we want to make sure is codified in our policy, the work that we're doing in there. So again, let's go back to this. What does this mean for the policy work? If we go to the next slide, we've got, again, the definitions, what this means in terms of course sequencing. There's also, again, if the student is not showing that CCR readiness, if they're not there yet, what kinds of supports are there to help that student become CCR ready? We always are thinking through some of the adults that we have in our schools to support them, whether it's the on track to graduate coordinators, our post-secondary advisors, we have career counselors. These are the kinds of supports we already have in place that, again, is setting the stage well for us to be in a full alignment with what the state's requiring, but it is work that we're going to have to make sure is reflected in our policy. Certainly the pathways to graduation, there are multiple options for how a student can be CCR ready and on track. And we want to make sure that's reflected in our policy, how we do our parent notification. And then again, there's some compliance reports that we want to make sure are updated to reflect these new changes. So again, for our students and families, you can see that there's going to be the credit requirement promotion. Again, we've done some work already from 9 to 10, but these are things that we're going to articulate out up through the grades. And again, the required complete and passing of Algebra 1 and 2 plus 2 more math classes. Again, the different options for how you can demonstrate college and career readiness, those have to be really laid out for our young people early on in their high school career so that they're knowing which path they're getting to ensure that they are going to meet that standard. And then again, as the CTE pathways, again, we've done some terrific work to build more opportunities for the credentialing. And that's work that is going to continue to grow and expand as part of our work to be fully CCR aligned with the state. And we want to just make sure that our young people also who want and are ready to take these, do what we call our dual enrollment, which is this credit-bearing courses at community colleges. These are things that we want to make sure that we have these supports in place to help our students access these opportunities. Again, it's a no cost for us for them to be able to take the dual enrollment and be earning college credit along the way while they're in high school. So again, a lot of changes coming from the state that have brought us to a space now where we've got to dig into IKEA and IKEB. And it's not necessarily anything that we're generating here locally in Baltimore City, but more to get ourselves aligned with the state expectations and these state policies. So as we go to the next slide, here are our next steps. I've just walked through at a very high level what are, again, much more robust policies. Again, those were shared with the board so you could sort of dig into some of those details. We're taking all of that under our review as we look at how we want to meaningfully incorporate them into our policies. We certainly need to be thinking about where in that pre-K to 3 literacy policy, the impact around retention and what that could mean as we go into school year 27-28 and being forward planning on how we think about our communication plans and campaign around this awareness for our families and students and schools around all of them. But I think in particular, this space around retention and these new expectations in mathematics and in the graduation requirements are going to require a level of just community awareness and knowledge building and opportunities for our parents and families to ask questions and learn more as we move into these over the next few years. And so with that, on the next slide here are, I think, our board questions. So in light of all that I have just walked us through, if there are recommendations for how we communicate with and connect with stakeholders to make sure that as we're working on these revisions, that our community is just really well aware and understanding the changes that are coming. And as you looked at these policies, or are you thinking about these policies, if there are things that are resonating for you that you want us, as we start to dig into this revision work, to take into account, again, part of the framing time for us is to hear from the board and to know that we are on the right track as we move in to what will be a really robust level of work over the next few months before we come to a policy, to the policy meeting. So with that, I'll quickly do the timeline and then we can come back to these board questions. So the last slide is our timeline. So again, today, the goal is just to frame, to hear from the board, their interest, thoughts, and questions. We come back in December on the 22nd for the initial presentation. It goes to first reader in February and finishes in second reader in April. The April date is intentional in that there will be system changes that we want to make sure can get ready for that July 1 as we start to move over into our tracking of students and things like that. So this runway gives us a nice opportunity to do this work thoughtfully and engaging with the board as we continue and dig in. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions and would love to hear board commissioners' feedback and thoughts regarding these changes.
Thank you so much, Chief Dabrowski. Appreciate the presentation this afternoon. And I'll start off with just some framing things that come to mind for me, just given the runway of time that MSDE is providing here. We have, I think, the connection point that you have here with our stakeholders to make sure they understand the implementation and implications are going to be really important, as well as something that is top of mind for me is that we have schools who are struggling in achievement historically at certain levels, and making sure that we understand what the projections may be and the other implications for retention, and also on the human capital front, how we're starting to think about human capital and implications that may happen in our lowest performing schools. I'm going to turn it over to board colleagues who may have questions or thoughts for Dr. Dabrowski and team. Commissioner Reagan-Wellinger.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I do think, Sheriff Sally, you put your finger right on the pain point, which is going to be the retention strategy, the retention policy. Chief Dabrowski, I just want to make sure I have this right because I feel like we're flying a little bit blind, but I want you to sort of check my understanding here. we have a new assessment coming out next year, and that is the assessment that is going to determine, that is essentially going to determine proficiency for our third graders and whether or not they are promoted. But we don't really have any information about the new assessment, and so it's kind of hard for us to, I would imagine it's hard for us to even think about, the scope of how have 1 year of a new assessment, and then the following year the retention policy goes into place. Is that correct?
Yep, Commissioner Long, you went out for just a second, but I think I heard what you were getting at, which is you're absolutely right. So you're right. There's a new assessment that's coming online, not this year, but the year after. And then a year after that is the first time that students would be held accountable to hit that level of proficiency in order to be promoted. I think the state has been listening to LEAs as we've been going into meetings, and because of the high stakes nature of retention, they have been very much in conversation with us about delaying that retention piece through the 27-28 school year. In early iterations, it was shown to be sooner, and there were quite a number of concerns raised because I think many of us felt that with an unknown sort of goal we're trying to work towards, it felt a bit unfair to sort of be holding children accountable for that. I think the state has also, so the delay for the 27-28 was sort of giving us an extra year. The other piece that was in and out of this policy throughout its development was that space around a parent waiver. Parents still have an opportunity to ask for their child to be promoted, even if they don't meet that third grade proficiency mark on the assessment. And we as the school district need to ensure that that young person has a reading improvement plan and will have opportunities for intervention during the school day to help remediate, accelerate their reading levels. So I do think we have a very robust screener that we use, which is foundational literacy. We know that the state assessment moves beyond foundational as it moves into comprehension and a level of writing about text. It's a more complicated assessment than our screener. So there is work for us to do between now and 27-28 to be tracking our predictive assessments to ensure that we are aware of where we are at risk. We can use our screener for that initial level, but there will be, I think, more work for us to do to get that predictive assessment that's lining up with MCAP or whatever this new version of MCAP will be to allow us to be ready. And I think where we experience this along the way, the state has been in good conversation with LEAs as they've been going this at every step of the way. So I'm hopeful that that will continue as it gets closer and closer to the 27-28 school year and what supports they will be providing local LEAs to be able to be ready for what that assessment will be.
Thank you for that clarification. That's helpful.
Yeah.
It's still a little scary,
is.
But it is helpful.
It is. Yep.
And I'm curious, also, Dr. Grabowski, like as you guys have started having conversations with educators and school leaders, I'm just curious the feedback that you guys have started to receive in terms of like concerns or supports that educators need to be able to not only achieve current, proficiency, but future proficiency levels.
Yep, I think for us here in city schools, again, because we've done such deep work in science of reading training, that we are in a good space with our summer trainings and summer institutes that we do with our educators to bring them into the space of understanding how students learn to read. We also can pair that with really strong materials. So our high quality materials, again, position us well. I think the other thing I would say is our investment in coaching allows our teachers to get that support right in their classrooms, right in their schools. So that, again, as we move into, I think, budget conversations and concerns about what we can and cannot continue to lift up, I would just want us to double down on our coaching commitments and also our tier 2 tutoring work. We were, again, during the pandemic, one of the leading districts in the country for our tutoring efforts. We've had to make decisions around scaling back and where we can find opportunities to ensure that we have strong early literacy tutoring. I think that, coupled with strong development work for our teachers and our coaches, it continues to position us well. And being able then to, I think, as we think about this current cohort of first graders, really be tracking this data to think about what particular efforts we want to be putting in place for them when they come into second grade next year and what they're getting right now as first graders. I think there's a vigilance we need to have on this particular cohort as the first one, as we're going through this timeline.
I appreciate that. Commissioner Ernst-Messenger?
I think I'm going to hold my question and follow up once I have the full slide deck in front of me.
Yeah, I guess one thing I think is just thinking about the family and community engagement is going to be really important. And so I know we do a good job on that here in city schools, but I think, this is just a doubling down of this effort is going to be really important, because this becomes a new data point that, becomes very visible real quick in the community. And so,
Yeah.
So I think a lot about that, the sensitivity. There are no more questions. There will be a lot more questions.
Chair Sally, I actually, and I realize that there are countless variables that go into this, as Commissioner Redding-Lollinger mentioned. Do we have an anticipated, based on continued, looking at our current benchmarks, do we have a percentage of students that we would anticipate being on the cusp of at risk for not meeting this mark?
So it's a great question. And again, because we have a robust screener, we can track that. We do track that. We are right now, our current first graders are engaged in BOY assessments. We will get that data in the next few weeks. We will be able to see where they are. And again, because we get that data in January and again in May, we will be able to track progress and anticipate what we're seeing and being able to use that to inform what are we going to be doing as these students matriculate up to second grade. And I think this is, again, because of this timeline and runway we have from the state, my recommendation is we are very strategic in how we are looking at, and to your point, you'll see students who are just on the cusp. You will see students who are well below. And again, we also want to track students who are on or above, because that can sometimes slip as they move up. So I just think there's a vigilance around, again, as we go through this first cohort, to be looking and thinking and planning for resources strategically in service of our students. Again, this is where I think the state, to their credit, has put a stake in the ground around we all have to rally around proficient readers by end of grade 3. So what are the things we might not be able to do if we want to put all of our stakes into that space of reading on grade level by the end of grade 3? So I think that's the space we are in right now as we go into this first grade and looking at their data.
And based on our current, historically over the last several years, do you have an anticipated percentage, if there is not change in this first grade cohort, of where we would be sitting? And just even thinking about demographics and staffing changes, if we are retaining a significant number of students, how do we prepare for that?
Yep. I think I would be reluctant to say without.
Of course.
When
It's good for a
we don't know what the assessment is. I mean, because the assessment is going to be incredibly high stakes, it may change what the state does. It really could have a whole different feel to it. So I would want to refrain from any premature. What I can say is, though, we can certainly look at previous MCAP and see what our achievement, what our proficient levels have been, and use that as an estimation. But I do think for me, I want to see what this new assessment is going to look like. And then to Commissioner Lollinger's earlier point, there seems to, the state's giving us a year, which is not a lot of time to sort of know, oh, this is what our kids have to be ready for in third grade. Because what they're doing right now could look very different than what they're going to be held accountable to a year from spring.
And let me add, if I could build on that, Commissioner Messenger, I can imagine like that will also spur some conversations about, early learning too, in terms of the investments there that we make not only here in city schools, but as we look at our other partners who provide early learning opportunities for our young people. I think building those bridges are going to be essential in order for us to achieve that. Like we can't, just start in first and second grade or kindergarten first and second. So um, this will be a lightning round of conversation in terms of, partnerships and where the work needs to transpire.
Agreed.
Are there any additional comments from board colleagues for this particular item? I appreciate you bringing this. This is really helpful. I think timelining, because there's a lot of timelines here, not just these ones here, Dr. Dabrowski, but the ones in terms of implementation and pieces will be helpful and digestible if we can think about how to package that, not only for the board when it comes before the board, but also for the public as well.
Yep. No, that's a great flag for us to work closely with comms, because each one of these policies has a very, intentional timeline, and we should be looking all those together. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. Thank you for the work. We appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
All right, we are going to move forward to update the board procedure BLC, procedures and appeals and hearings under State Code 73-05 of the education article. Is this Chief Sibbons who's doing this item?
It's not Chief Sibbon, but it's someone from OLC.
Hi,
All right.
I'm introducing Caitlin Barnes, who is one of our legal fellow last year, who's been promoted to be assistant counsel, and she's been leading the work on this one.
Well, welcome. Thank you so much for your work and the new this.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to be walking through some of the proposed revisions to Board Policy BLC, which is our policy about student discipline appeals. So this policy relates to strategic priorities 4 and 7, which are about engaging stakeholders and working towards equity. So Board Policy BLC, the long title is Procedures and Appeals and Hearings under Section 7305 of the Education article. And this policy provides the procedures for appeals of extended suspensions and expulsions. And I'm calling out those two types of student disciplines specifically because Maryland law has more specific requirements for appeals of those types of student discipline. And so this policy addresses those requirements under state law. We do have procedures for how to appeal other types of student discipline. So parents can appeal like an in-school suspension or a short-term suspension, but all of those appeal procedures are in Administrative Regulation JKARB. So I just wanted to clarify that this policy is only about appealing extended suspensions and expulsions. So this policy talks about filing and withdrawing appeals. It discusses the hearings and the hearing officers. It talks about the witnesses and the evidence that can be presented. And then it goes into detail about the decisions that the board issues after getting a recommendation from a hearing officer. And then just so we have a little bit of context about appeals under this policy, there is a compliance report every year. And so for the 23-24 school year, there were 7 appeals filed under this policy. So why is Board Policy BLC being opened up for revision? The primary reason is that we need to make some updates to align with the recent revisions that we made earlier this year to Board Policy JKA, which is the policy about behavioral interventions and student discipline. Because this is the policy, BLC is the policy about appealing types of student discipline, we just want to make sure that we are being consistent and that these two policies are aligned. So you can see in the box on the left, as it relates to appeals of extended suspensions and expulsions. We now say in JKA that a suspension counselor issues a final decision letter, which includes the right to appeal and the BLC appeal form. And then we clarify that the Director of Student Conduct and Attendance closely monitors that extended suspension and expulsion process, as well as the outcome of all the suspension conferences. And then in the box on the right, this is the language that we have right now in BLC. And you'll see that it no longer matches what we say about appeals in JKA. So BLC says that the Director of Suspension Services mails a letter affirming or denying the suspension or expulsion within 72 hours of the suspension conference. So, you know, we don't have someone whose title is the Director of Suspension Services. We no longer have that affirm or denial process in JKA. And so we just want to make sure that everything is in alignment. So looking specifically at some of the proposed revisions as it relates to aligning with JKA, we have proposed updating some definitions, including expulsion, extended suspension, and parent guardian, to make sure that we're using those terms consistently across the two policies. And then, as I just talked about on the previous slide, we have updated the explanation in BLC of how and when parents, guardians, and students are notified of their right to appeal. And again, they're notified by a suspension counselor in the final decision letter that's issued no later than 3 school days after the suspension conference. While we have this policy open, we're also proposing some other technical edits. So the first one is just standardizing how we are referring to the Maryland Code and to other board policies. We also, you know, it's important for all of our policies to be accessible to the community, but we really think that this policy in particular should be easy for people to understand because it lays out their right to appeal. It lays out all the rules and requirements for filing an appeal. And so in certain parts of the policy, you'll see that we've tried to streamline the language just to make it more accessible to parents, guardians, and students who might be filing appeals. And then we also, along those lines, we clarified that when a student, a parent, or guardian files an appeal under BLC, that filing of an appeal also serves as their request for a hearing. So they don't have to go through an extra step of submitting, okay, I'm filing my appeal, and now I also have to request a hearing. As long as they file that appeal, that's what starts the process of scheduling their hearing. So this is different from, like, for example, BLA, which is another policy that lays out our appeal procedures. Under BLA, we are explicit in saying that when you file an appeal, you have to take an extra step of requesting a hearing. And so our current practice under BLC is to automatically schedule those hearings when we get appeals, but there were a few parts of the policy that could have been read as suggesting that you needed to take that extra request of a hearing step. And so we just wanted to make it like super clear. If you file an appeal, you're getting a hearing. And then finally, when it comes to proposed revisions, based on a few of our recent appeals, we are considering potentially making a few other edits to clarify the rules of procedures associated with these hearings. But to the extent that we're going to make any of those additional edits would be presented at first reader. So when it comes to an engagement plan for these revisions, this is a tier 1 policy, which means that we're making some minor updates, technical changes, or changes required by law. So we'll be posting on the website for public feedback, and then we'll also be reaching out to stakeholder groups for their written feedback. And then, of course, we'll give them the option for a presentation and to get more of a discussion from them. So you can see the list of groups on the slide. I do want to point out at the bottom, we have the advocacy groups. So earlier this year, when we were revising JKA, which again is that student discipline policy, we did a lot of engagement with the advocacy groups. So that's, you know, places like the Office of the Public Defender, Public Justice Center. We got a lot of good feedback from them. And so because this policy also touches on student discipline, we will be reaching back out to them to get feedback on these revisions as well. Then finally, here is the timeline for this policy. And then if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you so much. I'll turn it over to my board colleagues for any comments or questions this afternoon. And okay, Commissioner Messenger.
Apologies, I know we're already running behind. I did have just a very quick, kind of the other amendment that was in there unrelated to those is looking within the section for students who have been expelled and looking at kind of the requirements for services to be provided, both academic and behavioral. I was just wondering if they're kind of where within code those were going to be outlined and kind of what are the parameters for the services those students will be getting.
I'm sorry, which section are you looking at?
Sorry, I'm looking on page 2 of the red line. So within the definition for expulsion in letter G, had gone in and looked at that the city is required to provide comparable education services and behavior support services. And so just looking like that is a very broad net, and for a lot of these students that the goal is for those students to be able to learn and be successful, and removing them from the school environment can be pretty destabilizing. So it was just curious kind of about what those services look like and what is the guidance that comes from the district for those students.
Yeah, so just to be clear, we did keep that piece of the definition in. I think in the red lines, it just looks a little wonky because it's been reformatted. But yes, it absolutely, that definitely stayed in the definition.
But where do we outline what that entails? Like, so as long as we're meeting their COMAR requirements?
So more details about that would be like in JKA, because those are the places where we really get in depth about, you know, while you're on extended suspension, while you're on expulsion. This is just, BLC is just laying out if you want to challenge that extended suspension or expulsion, here's the steps you take. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Any additional questions? I think that's it. We'll look forward to first reader.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Have a good evening. All right. We are going to move forward to policy JFBA, school choice processes and entrance criteria and an associated compliance report. Let's turn it over to O&I.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dominic Bivens. I'm a specialist in the Office of Enrollment Choice and Transfer. I'll be talking to you guys about our school choice process and the results of our choice process from this previous school year. Just to give an overview, we'll be talking about the timeline for our school choice process here in Baltimore City, our supports for our families, our strategies and implementation of the school choice process, the results of this previous iteration of the choice process, and our strategies for moving the choice process forward. This presentation is aligned with District Priorities 4, in which city schools will effectively engage stakeholders, including parents and families, and Priority 7, in which city schools will continuously work toward equity at all levels. So one of the first things we do is make sure that we engage families early and often as it relates to our choice process, as early as 3rd grade for our middle school choice process and 6th grade for our high school choice process. In those early grades, we want to make sure that families and students are start researching various school options and develop an understanding of how their academic performance impacts their access to entrance criteria, schools, and programming. By 4th and 7th grade, we want to make sure that students and families are familiar with their school's choice liaison, understand their child's interests and goals, and make sure that we remind families that test scores and grades are used to determine eligibility for those entrance criteria, schools, and programs. Just a brief overview of the timeline as it relates to our choice process. We usually kick things off in October, where schools start to host open house and shadow days for their school, those that are identified as choice sites, as well as engaging families in information sessions so that they have an understanding of the process and how it works. By December, we kick off with our annual school choice fair held at the Baltimore Convention Center, as well as that's when families find out their composite scores and can begin to submit their choice application. By the end of February, families find out their offer through the choice process, and then we run a second round of the process. So for those families that did not participate in the first round or want to explore other options. The way the process works is that we use a matching algorithm based on student selections. Families and students can select up to 5 choices on their application. And over the past several years, we've been consistently placing 65 to 75% of students in their first or second choice through the algorithm. For our entrance criteria schools, students are ranked based on their composite score, which I'll talk about more in this presentation later. And the students with the highest composite scores are the ones to receive placement in those entrance criteria schools and programs. For all of our other schools, a lottery is conducted to determine placement. For our entrance criteria schools and programs, these are the schools in which students must have certain grades and test scores and a qualifying composite score in order to attend. So at the high school level, that's Poly City, Dunbar Western, and at the middle school level, we have advanced academics or honors programming at Cross Country, Francis Scott Key, Mount Royal, Roland Park, and Waverly. The way the composite score is calculated is that we look at, for middle school, their final grades from 4th grade, and for high school, their final grades from 7th grade. We also look at the first quarter of the current school year, as well as the 4th grade assessments for MCAT, both in math and ELA at the middle school level, and at the going into high school, we look at the 7th grade and the 7th grade math and ELA assessment. In addition to our schools with entrance criteria, academic entrance criteria, we also have some schools that have alternative entrance criteria processes. Baltimore Design School requires students to submit a portfolio. Baltimore School for the Arts requires students to participate in an audition process. BARD has an essay and interview process that students participate in, and the Ingenuity Project, which is a separate entity with Baltimore City. They have their own admission process for placement in that particular program. So to support families in navigating the choice process, each school has a trained choice liaison that counsels and supports and guides families in navigating the process. Families can also receive support from the various enrollment teams here in central office to help as needed. Our office also creates a variety of tools and resources to help families navigate this process as well. This past year, we hosted, as I stated earlier, our annual school choice fair at the Baltimore Convention Center, where we saw over 3,500 students and families in attendance. In addition to the fair, we also create a choice guide that showcases our various schools and programming offered here in the district. We also have a website with a comparison tool that families can take advantage of, as well as our new student enrollment management system by which families can apply for their middle and high school choice options online. So as I just stated, the student enrollment management system, or SIMS as we call it, is the platform that we have for families to submit their online application for middle and high school choice. The great thing about this platform is that it allows us to operate more efficiently and communicate more effectively with families. They can access their offer letters. They all find them out find out about their placements at the same time, and we are able to communicate through the platform regarding the process. This year, we had over 3,400 families create an account in Sims to submit their application on their own. For those families, because as we know, there is a digital divide, for those families that need support, the Choice Liaison submits the application on the parent's behalf with their permission, of course, in the platform. So for those families that were not able to create an account, the Choice Liaison is there to support them in the submission of the application. So for our elementary schools, these charts display those elementary schools in which families engage with the platform and were able to create an account and submit their application. And then here we have the top middle schools or leading middle schools with families creating an account in the student enrollment management system. As it relates to our middle grade strategy, for our middle school choice process, we have students, our fifth graders fall into one of two priority groups, as we call them. For priority one, those are our students that do not have a zone middle school or feeder middle school to feed in from their current school. And so we prioritize those students in the middle school choice process. However, the middle school choice process is open to all of our fifth graders, but those that have a middle school seat or attend a K-8, for instance, those we consider priority 2 students. In addition to the priority preferences, we also have a sibling preference built into the algorithm. So for instance, if you have an older sibling that attends ACE and you list ACE on your application, you will receive a placement preference at ACE. We also have a location preference built into the algorithm. So if you live in Northwest Baltimore, you have preference to those middle school sites in Northwest Baltimore, as we don't want students, having to take 3 and 4 buses to get to school. It's important to note that these preferences do not apply to our advanced academic programming. A few years ago, the Great Educational Options Collaborative formed to identify school sites that could be added to our middle school choice process for families to select, giving families access to programs and schools and programs with honors offerings. And for our high school process, there have been some changes that have been made over the years. And so at this time, I'm just going to share some of the changes. And again, note that these were some recent changes, but changes that were made over the last 3 or 4 years to the process. The first one being a geographic placement preference for our lottery high schools. So similar to middle school choice, if you live in a certain section of this city or quadrant of the city, you have placement preference at the schools in that quadrant. Our traditional CTE sites, Carver, Edmondson, and Mervo, for the past several years, have not had an entrance criteria to ensure equitable access to the CTE offerings at those schools. And then, as I stated, for the last 2 years, we've had families utilize our new student enrollment management system to submit their middle and high school choice applications, as well as to respond to their offers and receive their offer letters through the platform. Some additional changes to the high school choice process is that we only utilize one formula to determine eligibility for the entrance criteria high schools. Last year, again, we used the MCAP scores as part of the calculation of the composite score. Looking at students' last year final grades and the current school year grades as part of the calculation. Lastly, we also those students that took honors, IB, or ingenuity courses receive an additional 10 points in the calculation of their composite score. So for example, if your scholar scored a 78 in their 7th grade honors science course, it's calculated as an 88 in the composite score. So now I'm going to talk about the results of the process. I'm pleased to report that over the last several years, we've had over 90% of our middle school 8th graders participate in our high school choice process. With this last iteration, we saw 93% participation among our 8th graders in the process. In addition to high participation rates, we also, for the past 2 years since the implementation of our new student enrollment management systems, have seen over 80% of students receive their first or second choice in the process. For our middle school choice process, we've seen over 60% of students participate in the process. It's important to note, as it relates to our middle school choice process, that we only look at our priority 1 5th graders. And also, unlike our high school, pre-K, and kindergarten enrollment processes in which all schools are listed, not all of our middle school options are listed as part of the middle school choice process. So I just wanted to note those 2 things. And with that, we've seen over the past several years, over 60% of students receive their first or second choice as part of the middle school choice process. And this year, we've seen the highest rate of students receiving their first choice, with 56% of students that participated receiving their first choice. So these next set of slides, the board has asked us to look at geographic and racial and ethnic groupings of how students are those students that are receiving their first choice. And so I'll just talk about that here briefly in these next few slides. This first slide is looking at the total number of students that received their first choice and the racial and ethnic makeup of those students. So of the 4,500 students that received their first choice, 69% of those students were African American, 25% of those students were white, and so on and so forth. For our Hispanic Latino population, we see about 20% of students that receive their first choice identify as Hispanic or Latino, which is in line with our population demographics as a city. As we look at the total number of students in each racial and ethnic group, we see that over 60 students across all of our racial and ethnic groups, approximately 60%, excuse me, receive their first choice as part of this process. In addition to looking at racial and ethnic groups, we also look at our students with disabilities. So this data is showing the middle school students with disabilities that participated in the choice process. And we see that for the past several years, over 70% of students with a disability participating in middle school choice received their first or second choice. This year, it's important to note that over 60%, which is the highest it's been in the last several years, 60% of our students with disabilities that participate in the middle school choice process receive their first choice. For our 8th graders going into high school, we've seen that for the past several years, 85% of our middle schoolers with disabilities receiving their first or second choice as part of the high school choice process. And this year we saw, and for the last 2 years with the implementation of the SIM system, we've seen over 70% of students with disabilities receiving their first choice. We also look at our multilingual learners, and we see that more than 70% of our 5th graders and 85% of our 8th grade multilingual learners are receiving their first or second choice as part of this process. We also look at the zip code in which students are receiving their first choice, with areas like Highlandtown, Park Heights, and Emerson Village being areas where students are receiving the highest number of their first choice. This can be attributed to a variety of things, but we know, for instance, in Southeast Baltimore, it's been my experience, a lot of those families request Patterson as their first choice. And so because of the geographic placement preference that's built into the high school choice process, students in that part of the city receive their first choice at that particular school. And then we also look at our top performing students schools, that receive first choice assignments. And obviously Roland Park and Mount Royal, as our largest middle schools, have the highest number of students that receive their first choice as part of the process. But we also see schools like Katherine Johnson and Pimlico where students are receiving their first choice at high numbers. In addition to looking at the number of students, we also wanted to look at the percentage rate at which students at these different schools were receiving their first choice. And so this year we saw that Halliburton Academy had 91% of their students that participated in the choice process receive their first choice. So we wanted to highlight those schools with high percentages of students receiving their first choice as well. So as we think about the choice process and how it's moving forward, we did a PASA poll with families that participated in the choice process this previous year, and we saw that nearly 60% of the families that participated in the survey reported being satisfied or very satisfied with the middle school choice process. Some opportunities for improvement. Families recommended expanding our school options, providing more academic support to help strengthen their child's composite score, and offering clear and more transparent explanations of the process. Some top decision-making factors for families as it relates to their application were strong academic programs, positive school culture and climate, and proximity to home. And we know that as a district, if we engage families in this process, support them with school-based staff, and provide them the necessary resources, simplify the process, and leverage our centralized communication and opportunities and relationships with families, that students will be better equipped to make more informed decisions as part of this process. Moving forward, city schools, we will continue to look at our school choice process and policy, as well as expanding our middle school options and reviewing the district portfolio of options available to families. And that's all I got.
Thank you,
Thank you for
Dominic.
your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I was remiss to say, this was in my notes as I was just looking here, that it's a collective team effort in terms of the amount of work that goes into this. So I want to thank not only Dominic for his work, but Brandon Tillman, Denisha Robinson, and of course, Chief Hike Hubbard for all of their leadership. So thank you. Let me go to Commissioner Ames Messenger, and I believe Commissioner Redding Hollinger. I'm sorry if it's out of order. My technology is a little messed up today. Emily, do you want to go?
I was going to let Stefan go first. First, and apologies if you heard, is there with regards to transfers, is there a compliance report coming on that end as well? Just realizing when we're measuring if students are in best fit, one of the best indicators of that is students then choosing to leave and transfer to go elsewhere. So is there a compliance report coming up for that shortly?
I'll jump in. This is Chief Hike Hubbard. Yes, there is a transfer policy. We're actually reviewing that policy, and we have a compliance report coming up. So both but that's not part of this presentation.
Okay, this fall it's coming up.
I have to look at the agenda, but we are bringing a compliance report first, and I believe that's maybe December or January. Brandon can correct me if I'm wrong about that. And then we're actually doing a policy review and edit this spring of the transfer policy.
Commissioner Ames Messenger, January 27th is the compliance on intra-district, and March 24th is the actual transfer policy discussion.
Thank you. So the The other question is looking, you had talked about students with disabilities, and that most are receiving their first or second choice. Is there a pattern in which schools they are choosing to elect? And kind of the follow-up is that are those schools able to then meet the needs of the students who are choosing to go there?
Well, not to speak for the Office of Special Education, but certainly all of our high schools are equipped to support our students with disabilities through that IEP process. I don't have the data readily available in regards to what the schools are choosing. I will note that, as I stated earlier in our presentation, we removed the entrance criteria from our CTE centers, again, to make sure that families had equitable access to the CTE offerings at those schools.
In terms of the
Questions?
academic programming at those schools, we would need the academics team to sort of speak to that. But like as Dominic said, we do expect that depending on the disability, right? Because the IEP is the ruler of everything. If the IEP says the student is eligible for that school should have the right supports in place to support that student, and the schools are held to that through our special education office. But if you wanted to get in more detail, the academics team would have to speak to that.
I guess maybe for more of in your wheelhouse, Chief, I covered kind of what is the process in terms of, because some of that is like I got the opportunity to speak to quite a few students over the summer and looking at kind of their reflections on the engagement process and then also the transfers process, which was really helpful and interesting and exciting to see kind of their thought process. But some of that is looking at the things that students are using to make decisions are not always necessarily the things that their educators or kind of other folks within the school system would use as those variables. So I think looking specifically for students with disabilities, realizing that that can mean exactly, Chief Hyde covered, like a great variety of things, and looking at kind of like specifically for students with IEPs, what are the resources that are going in to help students make informed and their families make informed decisions about what is going to be the school of best fit for students, and then looking at the patterns kind of long term. And maybe this is something to tap to that transfer conversation later in the spring. Thank you, Dawana, of like, are students ending up places where they are then able to be successful? And is there something that we should be acknowledging and looking to coach to earlier in that process as we see patterns of movement throughout the district? Does that make sense?
So what I would just offer, no, it does. Couple quick things. One, all of our choice liaisons are trained about how to help students and families make choices. And then specifically the IEP chairs or special education leads at schools are supposed to be looking at IEPs and giving guidance to families and students directly about what choices they have. So if you're, I won't go into an example, but I just want to offer, that's what we've charged schools to do. Dominic does train all of the liaisons, and I'm assuming maybe some of the IEP chairs come to your trainings as well, Dominic, but that is in place. Whether or not it's implemented with fidelity and perfect, I couldn't answer that question, and we can certainly look into that and make sure it's a stronger offering, but that is something we normally do as a practice.
No, thank you, Chief Hyde Covered. That's exactly right. And that's exactly what I was going to say, is that our office partners with the Office of Special Education and IEP chairs at our various schools. We provide them training as it relates to the process so that they're better equipped to support families with disabilities in navigating the process. So thank you, Chief Hyde Covered.
Awesome. Commissioner Reagan-Wallinger?
Yes, thank you. I actually have 4 questions. The first is, I didn't hear any mention of attendance being taken into account for students. Is attendance used in any of our processes for entrance criteria schools, either at the middle or high school level?
No. And the reason for that,
I agree with, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, the reason for that is it was included years ago. But the system that we were using at the time, which is why we have a new enrollment system now that we're utilizing, but the system that we were using at the time did not distinguish between unexcused absences and excused absences. And we wouldn't want to unfairly penalize students that may have missed school because of illness or for religious holidays and things like that. We thought that that would be inequitable. So years ago, it was removed from the determining placement in our schools.
That's great. I applaud that, not just because it couldn't distinguish, but, you know, if we're looking at it for the middle school system, elementary students aren't usually the ones who decide whether they go to school or not. It's usually on their parents. So I'm
Right.
glad that that is not part of the process. The second question is, for our entrance criteria schools at the high school level, are there a fixed number of seats that you
Yes.
rank so it's not minimum composite score? It's just there's number of seats and we fill them as students are ranked.
Correct.
Okay, great, thanks. The third question is, can you talk to me about the timeline relative to typical timelines in the Baltimore area for private and parochial schools in terms of finding out whether you've been admitted to a school and when you need to say yes? Do you have some data relative to the most common private parochial school admissions processes?
So we're in essence as a district in competition with private and parochial schools. So we don't keep track of their deadlines and things like that. But in service to our families who we know that are making multiple decisions and looking at multiple schools is what I meant to say. We do try to align our deadlines with theirs, which is why we've moved from releasing the results from mid-March to early to late February. So that's one thing that we've done as a district to try to accommodate those families that are trying to weigh their options between a seat here in Baltimore City Public Schools and a seat in the private or parochial school.
So I heard you say that you are cognizant of it and you tried to move it up to make sure folks can have that choice, but you're not tracking the deadlines locally. Is that
So
right?
do I know the specific dates for when private and parochial schools release their results? No. But like I said, in an effort to align our timelines better with those schools and programs, we've moved it up from, like I said, mid March to early February to accommodate families.
I'll just add that our
Appreciate that.
experience has
Go
been
ahead.
March 1st is the deadline that they have to sign by. So they might get accepted earlier, but we want to be able to get by mid-February the answer of our acceptance. That's what families have told us, that they have to sign something by March 1st. And so we try to get their information at least a week or two ahead of that so they have a chance to make the decision for city schools as well.
I appreciate that. And my push is this. I actually don't think, to me, it's not about accommodating families. I actually think it's what you said first is we want students to choose Baltimore City Public Schools. And if there are instances where they don't even get the chance to make the choice, I think then we have fallen short. So I would encourage us to actually track those places, considering them as competition, and make sure that our timeline adheres to that, because I think we need to see them as competition and we want to win that competition. We want students who are considering those schools to come to our schools. So that's my push here is it's okay that you don't have the dates in front of you. You're not able to tell me right now, but I do think you should be tracking those dates and we should strive in all cases to beat those dates so that we're getting those students. I just don't want to lose students to those schools, particularly knowing how high quality of a product we have here in city schools. So that's just my push there. My last question
if I could just
is,
quickly comment on that,
please.
Commissioner Lodge, I would just say
Yep.
we have worked for the past 2 years to make sure that happens, right? So I challenged the team with getting those information and getting our stuff out before. We were getting it after, and families were not choosing us, to your point. So they've done a tremendous amount of work speeding up the timeline, but we'll make sure we get the dates so at least we are aware of them as they change, because we also expected they might change the dates based on us changing our dates. So we will stay on top of that. But thank you for saying that.
Thank you for being. I appreciate. That's, I'm a little surprised to see the number of here to the note that as a board member, I don't think I saw those come before the board. So are our admissions policies technically in board policy? Do those come before the board before they're changed from year to year? Or are these things that are not in board policy and this office sort of just changes based on and your own input? Can you talk me through how decisions around like entrance criteria, what's going to be used, how it's going to be used, how are those made, and how is the board involved or not?
Sure. So a lot of these recent changes that were made in the process were born out of the pandemic and trying to best accommodate families in that difficult time. Some of this is such as with the removal of entrance criteria for our CTE centers. Again, the decision was made to better allow to make sure that we were being equitable in access to those programs, CTE programs that are federally funded at those schools. To your point, we do bring them to cabinet before we make any kind of significant change. But as I said, a lot of these changes were born out of just us trying to adapt and accommodate families in the middle of the pandemic.
So they're not governed by board policy, or they are, and it happened before I got on the board. I'm just trying to understand, like, when official changes to to admissions policies happen in the district, is that not a board function? Is there no board oversight there, is my question.
So as it relates to our middle and high school choice policy, there have been no changes that have been made in those. The changes that I've outlined are more around the process and not necessarily our board policy as it relates to our middle and high school choice process.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm just going back to a couple examples that you put in the PowerPoint deck. So, for instance, the change here around how final grades are calculated, whether grades include honors, IB, ingenuity. Go ahead.
So the board policy that in regards to how the composite score is calculated, that has not changed throughout the past several years. That formula has initially remained the same. It has changed, and it was a small minor changes. We went from it being 10% of the that they got an additional 10%, we went to 10 points. And that was to ensure that those students that may have earned high markings in their grade got the full allocation of points as part of their composite score calculation.
So I appreciate the explanation, and I'm not actually saying that any of these changes are bad or wrong. I'm just trying to understand what changes need to come before the board and what changes just get made in the office, because I'm not used to changes to admissions policies not being board policy, and that's sort of what it's feeling like. But I'm asking the question because I've only been on the board for a year and change, so I don't know if these were changes that were adopted by the board before I got on and now are taking effect, or if they are not governed by the board. That's really my ultimate question.
So let me just jump in quickly and share that we have not changed our admissions policies, if you will. What we've done is if the state has required us to change something, we make edits to that. For example, there's several schools where we were not allowed to have entrance criteria. We removed them from that. The composite score is presented to the formula is presented to the board every year, as we are doing now. If the board had flagged changes or concerns about the composite score formula, they would have let us know. They have never asked a question or been concerned about the way the formula is written. So we already have it set for this year based on this compliance report. If the board is interested in us considering changes to the composite report, now would be the time to signal that, and we'd have to schedule it into the timeline. But it's not, there has not been historically a practice of the board actually reviewing the composite score formula. And I would just offer for Ingenuity, that is not set by the district. That is a contract with the Ingenuity group, and they set their entrance criteria. The only entrance criteria that we have are for our advanced academic programming at the middle school level and for our 4 entrance criteria high schools, and then the individual schools, like for example, Bard, through their contract with the district, that is how their entrance criteria was established. When the board voted on their contract, that was established. And BSA also has a charter that was established years ago that also approved their process for admissions. So that's the way in which those things have happened historically.
Great, that's very helpful. And I'm not signaling that I'm wanting to make changes. I'm just wanting to make sure that when changes are made, we know that those changes are happening before they happen. That's really all I'm saying. And I think you're clarifying for me yeah, some changes are being made because of state policy. That's out of our hands. I get that. You know, Ingenuity controls their own entrance. So explaining how that works helps. It's my antenna just goes up when I see these are changes from last year to this year, and I, as a board member, haven't seen those come before the board. That's why I flag that.
Yeah,
I
and
do
I
want to
appreciate
note that
that. And wait, hold on one second, Dominic, I'll let you jump in. One small example is that for middle schools, if we just add more schools into the mix, for example, it's not really changing the formula. It's being aware of where middle schools have 30 or more seats available, or whatever the number is, 15, Dominic, I think it is. If they have more seats available, we add them to the mix, but like we haven't changed the formula in years. But go ahead, Dominic, I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to note that the changes that were highlighted in this presentation were things that were done years ago. They were done recently, but they were done years ago. So there have not been any significant changes to the policy. Well, there haven't been any changes to the policy. We just highlighted some of the changes to the process.
Gotcha. Okay, that's very helpful. I appreciate it. I understand that. That is the extent of my questions. Thank you for bearing with me. I appreciate it. Thanks for all your hard work.
My one question, and then this can be a follow-up offline, given the timing that we're at, is also thinking about it from as a middle school teacher here in Baltimore City. One of the things I'm acutely aware of is that, you know, we have a limited number of guidance counselors, and quite often our teachers and educators at various levels are also involved in the choice process from an educational standpoint. I'm curious, you know, what supports are we providing at those relative levels to support educators in understanding how to support young people navigating through that? If you could follow up with me in writing on that, that would be great.
Can I answer one part of that question though quickly?
Sure.
And that is that years ago, we learned that the choice liaisons weren't being paid for their extra work. And we actually pay stipends to choice liaisons. It might be a guidance counselor, it might be a teacher, but they get paid by our office to do that extra work. And they get trained by Dominic and team extensively on how to do that approach. Just want to make sure you knew that.
Yeah, and I guess, like, do we have enough of those people is where I'm going with that question, is like, do we have enough of those liaisons to support the number of young people, you know, in our standalone middle schools, and that in those cases in our elementary schools, in our K-8s, like, do we have enough of those folks who are sufficient in numbers to really sit down and work with parents and young people regarding questions and navigating the process? I think that's a big question, but it's just one that I have.
Yep, every school is required to have one, but to your point, that they could use more potentially, but every school is required to have one, and they do. Dominic checks that off to make sure they're doing their work.
Something the board should talk about in terms of areas of investment in that, just given the emphasis put on choice and transfer. All right, this takes us to the end of the presentations for this afternoon and evening. Thank you so much, Dominic. I appreciate that. I just want to clarify, we are not looking at arts policy this evening. That's coming before the board in subsequent months. That was my misspeak at the top of the call. I'm going to turn over to public comment. I'm not sure, Dawana, do we have any public comment scheduled this afternoon?
Mr. Chair, there are no people signed up for public comment.
All right, easy enough. To streamline our process to look at compliance reports, just want to ask our board colleagues if there are any questions regarding any of the compliance reports that are brought before the board this evening. There's ACA non-discrimination policy, ADF wellness, nutrition and physical activity, EAB, the disclosure of financial and proprietary, JJIC, academic eligibility for interscholastic athletics, and LCA, conducting research and surveys and data sharing compliance report.
I have questions, but I can follow up in another setting, given the time.
All right, if you submit it to the board office, they can move it forward. Commissioner Reagan-Lowinger, do you have any questions for the team?
I'll do the same. I was just about to say that I need to get off the call because we're a little bit over. So I'll submit any questions I have to the board office. Thank you.
Great. So this takes us to the end of our evening. I want to thank the public for their participation and their patience with us as we navigate our technology. We'll be back in October for our next policy meeting. and we'll be rejoining our public board meeting on October 7th. So we'll see everybody then. Thank you guys for the participation this evening. Good night.
Thank you everyone for your work.
Thank
Have a good
you.
evening.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.